everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm doing my October wrap-up. In the month of October, I finished a total of 4 books, which is pretty low for me. It is probably my lowest reading month in a very long time, but that's okay because I had some personal stuff going on this month and I'm not going to be upset about it. I'm still happy that I managed to finish 4 books this month, so no worries, we're still going to talk about all of them in this video today. So for the stats, I read a total of 3 3.5-star books and 1 4-star book. For the genre breakdowns, I read a total of 2 horror books, 1 sci-fi, and 1 fantasy. And then for the age breakdowns, I read 3 adult and 1 middle grade. So I'm just going to go in the order of my enjoyment, starting with a book I read for an event that took place this month, which was hosted by Kira over at TheBookBella, whose channel I will link down below because she is so delightful, so wonderful. She hosted a Halloween costume contest here on BookTube that was super fun to participate in, and we also held a live show to discuss our book pick for this event, which was Mexican Gothic by Sylvia Moreno Garcia. I ended up giving this book 3.5 stars. This book follows a woman who essentially is asked by her father to go and check on her cousin who is recently married to a man who kind of lives far off in the countryside, pretty remote, pretty isolated, and they got a weird letter from her cousin that was very concerning because it sounded like her cousin was in a lot of trouble and a lot of distress. So she went to check on her cousin and kind of enters into this pretty gothic, creepy house with these very questionable people who live there. And her cousin, when she arrives, seems okay, but seems different in a certain way. And so our main character, Noemi, is just trying to figure out what happened to her cousin and is trying to figure out the mystery of this house and how it connects to these mysterious accidents that have happened in the past in this village. This book was sold as a horror book, and personally, I just didn't find it all too scary. I think that's my biggest complaint is when I read a horror book, I want to be a little bit creeped out. This one was just more of gross. So I think it definitely depends on kind of what scares you, whether or not you're going to find this creepy. If you find body horror very creepy, then this book really might appeal to you. I personally don't find body horror type of imagery very scary. It's more of just kind of gross. Like, it makes me want to shower afterwards. So that's kind of what this book did for me. It kind of left this weird taste in my mouth where I just kind of wanted to shower after reading it. But I wasn't scared at any point. I never felt like I was on the edge of my seat needing to know what happened. I think the first half of this book is pretty slow and takes a long time to get going, and a lot of the events that are happening in the first half of the book are very repetitive. Our main character continues to have the same conversation over and over again with another character, for instance, and it always kind of has the same outcome. So that kind of repetition in the beginning half of this book got old pretty quick for me. I was pretty annoyed by like the middle of the book when really nothing had developed or occurred, and we were kind of just going through the same points over and over again. But in the second half of the book, and when we figure out some of the twist and some of the mystery, it does start to get really intriguing, and I found it very, very unique. I personally have never read anything like this. I think that's why it was very appealing to a lot of people, because it definitely has a twist that you don't see very often, and it's a very unique twist. I don't want to say anything, I don't want to spoil anything because I do overall recommend this book, but I personally did like the direction of the twist towards the end. I liked some of the aspects of that twist, didn't like other aspects quite as much. There were a couple of plot conveniences that the twist introduced, which I thought were a little bit outlandish, but this is definitely more than just an ordinary haunted house story. So if you go in with the right expectations of this not being the scariest book, it being kind of more of a gross, like body horror type book, and if you go in just kind of expecting maybe a little bit slower of a build-up, I think you'd really enjoy this. The writing style in this is stunning. I really liked the way that the author was describing a lot of the atmosphere, the way she was describing the house that they were in. Very easy to visualize kind of where our characters were at. Overall, I did have a good time reading this. I'm really, really glad I read it. And if you're looking for something that's very atmospheric, that has a very beautiful writing style, that has a main character who is definitely more of like a go-getter, she's not going to take any crap from anybody, she's definitely very spunky, then I do recommend this one. But overall, it just didn't scare me enough. There were a couple things that I didn't love plot-wise in this book, and I thought that first half of the book was just a little too repetitive for me, so that's why I ended up giving it 3.5 stars. The next book I have is Nightmare by Chad Nicholas. This was so kindly sent to me by the author in exchange for an honest review, and overall I am so glad I read this. Very much the opposite of Mexican Gothic, this book actually really scared me. It had a lot of moments where I had to stop reading the book at night because I was so afraid it was going to keep me up. This one had very intense imagery, and if you are afraid of crows or scarecrows, then proceed with caution because this book definitely plays up fears on those types of things. Essentially, this follows our main character named Scott, who had something happen to him when he was a child that resulted in him having issues with some of his mental health. And as these things from his past kind of start to catch up with him, he is essentially fighting for his own and his family's survival against things from his past. And so kind of in the first half of the book, you aren't really sure where it's going, you don't really know who you can trust, and you also are slowly realizing what happened to Scott, our main character, as a child that was so horrific. And by the second half of this book, I could not put it down. It was such a page turner. I ended up reading this in 2 days because it was so intense. This truly is, I would say, definitely a psychological thriller horror book. It is very gruesome. This is definitely not for the faint of heart. I would say if you are new to the horror genre, Mexican Gothic is a really good place to start. This one, not so much because it is very scary. And the twist towards the climax of the book was really well done. I loved the twist in this book. My biggest complaint, I would say, is the writing style. It definitely read like a debut book. Not that that's bad. The writing style didn't prohibit me from really enjoying this story, but a couple of times it did take me out just a little bit. The other thing I will say is some of the logic that was used in this book, like there's a doctor character, there's a psychologist character, and just in my mind, I just didn't find a lot of their interactions and dialogue very realistic. There could be an explanation as to why this was the case. I don't want to say anything more because I don't want to spoil anything, but kind of reading this book up until the point of the twist at the end, you weren't sure if some of the things in the logic were on purpose or not. And I think that that's kind of what took away from a little bit of my enjoyment, was just not totally buying some of the events that were happening building up to the climax. So overall, I gave this book 3.5 stars. I thought this was an excellent debut novel by this author. I would 100% check out anything else that this author writes in the future. I think that this was an excellent horror novel. Really kept my attention the entire time. I couldn't put it down. There were just a couple of those logic things that kind of took me out of the story. But again, I would highly recommend this one for any fans of psychological horror books, and just wanting a fast, compulsive read that might keep you up at night, especially if you're afraid of crows and scarecrows. So proceed with caution with this one, but I really enjoyed it. The next book I have to talk about was the Shelf Space book club pick for this past month, and that was Leviathan Wakes by James S.A. Corey. At the time of recording this video, we haven't yet had the live show for this book, so I'm sure that a lot of my spoilery thoughts will be talked about in that live show, so I'm going to link that live show down below because it will be up by the time this video goes up. Leviathan Wakes follows two different perspectives. One perspective is from a captain of an ice miner ship where something happens at the very beginning of this novel that kind of leads him on this adventure towards finding out this sort of political conspiracy that's happening in the solar system. The other perspective is from a detective who has been hired by this very wealthy family on Earth to find their missing daughter that has run away into space. And this kind of leads him to cross paths with our first perspective, that captain of that ice mining ship. So this book I ended up giving 3.5 stars. I'm still kind of on the fence with that rating. I still have to kind of think about this book for a little bit longer to feel super confident in keeping that 3.5 star rating. But upon finishing this, I thought it was 3.5 stars. The reason being, this book, for the first half, I was really enjoying because it read like a detective, kind of like murder mystery, political conspiracy type thriller, just set in space. There's these really big events that happen at the beginning of this book that immediately raise the stakes and make you very invested in what's going on because you don't know who's going to be safe and who's going to survive. I love when authors show you at the very beginning of the book that they are not afraid to kill off some characters. So I thought this book started with a bang. I definitely had to know what was going on and I had to keep reading. And then kind of in the middle of the book, the tone really shifts from a detective murder mystery book to a like sci-fi horror book. Totally took me by surprise, but I actually really liked it. At first, I really liked this scene that happens kind of right in the middle of the book where you are just like, did not see that coming. The less you know about this book going into it, the better, because I had no idea what to expect with it and it took me by surprise, and I ended up actually being really pleasantly surprised by the shift in tone. The issues started kind of arising shortly after that big scene that I really enjoyed. My issues kind of kept building until the very end of this book. I thought the ending was just wildly impossible. Like, it just didn't seem very grounded in science and kind of seemed silly in a way, because our characters don't really know what's going on towards the end of this book, and so as a reader you also have no idea what's going on because no one in the story is explaining anything to you, which is not necessarily a bad thing. I don't necessarily need everything explained to me, but in a sci-fi book that especially started the way it did, which was very grounded in science, towards the end, when something that seems like magic kind of starts to happen and isn't explained to us, it just comes off as silly. I don't know how else to explain it. So this book kind of had me on this roller coaster of emotions where one moment I was really loving my time with it, and then the next moment I was like, wait, what? How is that possible? Why is that happening? What is going on? Can anyone explain how this would even be remotely possible? So I kind of started to feel a little bit less positive towards the end of the book. The other thing that I don't think was the strongest in this book was the characters. For the first half of the book, it was kind of hard to tell the two perspectives apart from each other for me. They started to blend together a little bit too much. It's like their personalities were a little too close together. That problem definitely becomes solved by the middle half of the book where these two characters meet. I immediately could tell them apart. They had very, very different belief systems, and that was really interesting to explore, was kind of how their different belief systems balanced each other out and how they kind of opened each other's eyes to different perspectives. And so that was really interesting. But kind of towards the first half, I wasn't crazy about the character work, but the second half was much stronger. And then the other thing is the side characters, I don't think were quite developed enough for me to really, really care. Like, I never felt very, very emotionally invested in these characters' stories, which was surprising considering that the stakes were raised so early on in the novel. You would think that you would be so connected to the characters who had survived a couple of these huge events, and I just didn't really feel that like emotional connection as much as I wanted to these characters. So I would say character work for me wasn't the strongest in this one, and it did have really, really fun moments, but I was a little disappointed by the ending. However, I'm definitely going to continue on with the series. I think a lot of this will be explained in future books. I hope it doesn't take too long to get the explanations and the development that I'm looking for, because I know that this is a 9-book series, so I hope it doesn't take too long. So definitely let me know your own thoughts about this book. I know it's really, really popular, and I really would like to watch the TV show now because I've heard amazing things about the TV show. And kind of reading this book, I'm a little bit scared now to watch the TV show because some of the visuals in this book were so disturbing, so gross. So a little scared, but I'm also very excited for it. So overall, I did really have fun with this. I just had some problems that kind of took away a little bit from the rating. So I did end up giving this 3.5 stars. Again, I think I have to sit on it for a while, see how I feel the more removed from it I get. And this is kind of a series that I think I have to take a break from before immediately going into the next book. I don't think it's like the most bingeable series for me because it is pretty dense. There's a lot of space talk in this one. It is a little bit of a trek to get through, and they're not short books, they're a little bit big. So I'll take a little break and then jump into the sequel, and hopefully it only gets better and better. I'd love to hear anyone else's thoughts if you've read any of the Expanse series. What do you think of it? Do you think it gets better? I'm excited to continue on, and I'm definitely glad that I finally read this one. And then the last book, and my favorite book of the month, was Northern Lights by Philip Pullman, which is the first book in the His Dark Materials trilogy. So I actually had started watching the HBO show for His Dark Materials, but I decided to stop watching because I really, really wanted to read the book, and I'm very, very glad that I did. I actually listened to this one on audio, and I think the audiobook for this one is really fantastic because every character is narrated by a different audiobook narrator, and I loved that. I think it added so much to the story, having every character have its own voice and really making them come to life. I did not read this as a kid growing up, so I do feel like I kind of missed the boat a little bit with this one. I definitely can appreciate a lot of the world building and the story that was told in this book. I love the world and how every human has an animal demon that kind of represents who that person is. I think that that is so fascinating to explore, and I love how those demons kind of change as their host is a child, and then when their host or their human finally is like an adult officially, that demon chooses its permanent shape, and that kind of represents who that human is. Love that idea. I also really just liked the plot of this book. It kind of combines this fun mystery with this adventure story, and Lyra as a character, she's very spunky, she's very courageous, she's definitely a character that I could have seen myself loving as a kid. I would have definitely related to this character, looked up to this character. She's a fabulous, fabulous middle grade protagonist. I think any complaints that I have are just because I'm not the target audience for this book any longer. If I had read it as a kid, I would probably have felt very, very differently about it. But as an adult, some of the stuff later on in the book, once they get to the north, got a little silly. There were, you know, these polar bear clans that Lyra explored, and these fighting polar bears. It was all cute, but it was just, you know, a little young for me. You know, I'm trying to judge kind of based off of this being a middle grade book and me not necessarily being the target audience, but I'm just trying to kind of put myself back in that mental space of if I was a middle grade reader, what would I think of this book? So overall, I really enjoyed it. I thought it was very fun. I really like some of the ideas that it's exploring with the world building, especially the demon interactions with the humans. I liked the character work a lot. There's a lot left to be explained. A lot of the mystery is definitely still unsolved, which I think is a lot of fun for future books. I'm excited to see, you know, what all this dust is all about, what the city in the sky is. I'm very excited for more of this mystery to be explained and solved. So I'm definitely going to continue on with the series. I'd love to know what you all thought of this. Did you read it as an adult for the first time and what did you think? Did you grow up with it and what did you think? I wish I had read this one growing up. I think I would have loved it. It is definitely a fun book for middle grade readers. So overall, 4 stars. Again, any complaints I have are just because I'm not a middle grade reader any longer, which isn't really fair complaints whatsoever. So 4 stars, very happy I finally read it. So that was my October wrap up. What was your favorite book that you read this month? Definitely leave those comments down below. Thank you all so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, make sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and I will see you all in my next one. Bye!